Hey everybody! Yeah, I know, I still don't have the next video done yet, but welcome back to the Many Saints of Gabagool with JR. This interlude was a little less planned than the last one. Well, somewhat. And for the few of you who are wondering, I need to address something. Where the hell I've been? Well, let me just start off by saying, for the month of December, everything just got timed so poorly. I had a planned vacation that was outside of my home state for about a week that was right at the beginning of the month. However, during that week, I caught the plague, go figure, and I was away from all my equipment, my PC and my mic, so I couldn't even do that. After being out of commission for another week, I finally got back home and Christmas was just around the corner. Although I had wanted to get back to the channel as soon as possible, I just felt so much like shit. I didn't even get to celebrate the holidays properly, so that didn't exactly help either. And I felt bad for being absent for so long and not getting out anything. So here I am, trying to compensate for that a little. Now that I'm back, here's something for you guys, my very small audience. Well, let's get on with it. One thing I have been trying to do as of late is trying to play new games and watch new movies, especially play new games. Because I came across the realization that there are a lot of games that I own that I still have yet to even touch. Hell, a small bit of those games could make for future videos, who knows? One of those games will be the focus for the later part of the video, but I'll get to that. For now, here's my games list for reference. And as you can see, I have quite a bit to get through. And this doesn't even account for games that I want to play and don't own. All these I own. I really do need to pick up the pace though. Sure, it hasn't been taking up all my time, so I've been going through it a little slowly, but it has been taking up a fair chunk of my time. Let's take a look at one of these games that I've been playing as of late. Just for a little quick review. However, I do have to preface it before I get into it. Let me tell you people, one of my all-time favorite games is the original Deus Ex, very easily. It's a clunky, flawed game that can be rather frustrating to play at times. However, the game is just so layered and well constructed that I can't hate it, and thus I can overlook a good majority of its flaws. The story and gameplay progression alone makes things feel very rewarding. And I'm not a huge fan of RPGs as it is. Matter of fact, let's take a look at some of my favorite games of all time. As you may have noticed, there's kind of a theme to these. Pretty much all of these are shooters in some form, and they're not really all that complex either. Yet when it comes to Deus Ex, with all of its mechanics and layers, it, for whatever reason, just checks all the boxes for me. While I love the original to death, this game became a franchise. And honestly, I've been afraid to touch any other games in the series. None of them just seem to capture my attention like the original did. But when making my games list, I decided to buckle down and finally play at least one of them to start out with. If you haven't already gathered, I decided to start out with Human Revolution. At the time of making this video, I'll admit I haven't completed Human Revolution yet. I'm about halfway through, maybe just a little more than halfway, but I've played enough that I'm able to give a detailed rundown of how my experience has been thus far. Let's just begin with what I like about it, and that's mostly the gameplay. It's a winner in my book. Well, like I said, mostly. One of my complaints about the original game is how clunky it played, and that's not helped by its very extensive control scheme. While the control scheme isn't the most out there one I've ever seen, it still makes mostly sense. There are just too many damn key bindings. A lot of them link to a lot of the mechanics in the game. On top of that, some of the default bindings are just plain fucking weird. Revolution seems to improve on the gameplay by making things more streamlined, but without taking away too much. The game can still be kinda clunky at times, but compared to the original, it's pretty smooth. A lot of the upgrades to your augmentations can just be super useful. For example, there are several categories for hacking, and upgrading each one is very, very useful. Or much more simply, having an upgrade that negates fall damage. Because the player character of the game, Jensen, doesn't take fall damage too well, even if you're not that far up. The non-lethal melee takedowns are always entertaining to watch. I never bore of them. Plus, when it comes to dudes with the heavy machine guns or whatever, and they've got a shitload of armor on, they'll take them down with just one hit, so they're really useful too. I do miss having limb-based damage and having multiple methods of breaking into places with traditional lockpicks or multi-tools. However, the way this game handles things, gameplay-wise, I can live with that at least. Essentially, the gameplay is what keeps me playing this game. That means, what do I have a problem with? Well, every other goddamned aspect of this game, really. And this game is story-driven. For it being story-driven, it's awful. Like the original game, you initially don't know what's going on with the story, and only find out more as you progress. Now, I do like that aspect. I mean, it's done very well in the original, but here, I just don't find it at all interesting. A lot of that comes from the NPCs I have to interact with, and yeah, most of them aren't interesting. A lot of them just feel the same to me, really. Although, in my first few hours of playing the game, it seemed like all character interactions were just flat out frustrating. They were either overly animated or just straight up antagonistic. And when it comes to antagonistic, that's especially true for your IT guy, Pritchard, who was always either very snobby or just nagging you. It feels kind of reassuring in this game that when most NPCs who do that to me, I could just kind of either punch them out or shoot them in the head. But it kind of sucks I couldn't do that with Pritchard here. Now, the further I got into the game, the less of a prick he became. But those times that I had to interact with him in the first part of the game, I just wanted to fucking curb stomp him every single time. I hate his goddamn face and his goddamn voice. All around, the NPCs were just kind of painful to interact with or just boring. So the game was incentivizing me to interact with as few characters as humanly possible, which is exactly what I did. The game is absolutely hideous to look at. Now, while the texture and model fidelity itself isn't at all bad, it's pretty on par with what 2011 had to offer. Everything's coded in either gray or yellow. I hate looking at this game in general, but especially for long periods of time. I try not to play it for more than an hour. Alongside that, this game is supposed to be a prequel to the original, taking place about 25 years before. Yet the art direction is way more fancy, lavish, and futuristic looking than the original. Even though the original takes place in about 2052, a lot of the architecture and fashion style still looks pretty modern, with only some sci-fi elements mixed in. I thought it was a pretty good mixture. Revolution though, nah, it's all sci-fi all the time. And not just sci-fi, but the game has a very anime feel to it. Okay, with this game, I've already been in the minority as it is, but I'm gonna go even further into that and say I already don't like anime. Generally, the medium does nothing for me. All that shit is just too out there for me to really enjoy. Or even then, you've got a billion different anime shows out there, and a lot of them are really fucking long too. And I get the sense a lot of those are the cases where the first few dozen seasons are absolutely awful, but then it gets good eventually. I don't do that shit. I already don't watch many TV shows, and if a TV show can't grab me in the first season, then I'm out. The shite writing to this game certainly contributes to that anime feel, but even without that, this game has a very futuristic feel to it. A lot of the technology in this game looks highly advanced, even more so than the original. Gee, with this one being a prequel, I thought the original would have had more advanced technology. Since Revolution is a prequel, like I just said, and the original takes place in the pissing future! There are just way too many XP giveaways in Revolution. Granted, it does help upgrade a lot of your abilities, which, you know, there's a lot of those. But it just feels less rewarding. There's plenty of opportunities to gain XP in the original, but it felt like it was in places and situations where it made the most sense, and even then, the XP giveaway was normally variable. Sometimes secret areas would only give you 50 points, other ones would give you 75 or 100. It varied. But in Revolution, well, for example, in the game when I first reached Hungsha, China, I did quite a bit of exploring just to see anything that would help me out, like XP or places I could break into to get money or weapons or something like that. And because this was China, the streets contained a lot of open air markets. And most of those markets contained closets I could go into. But just about every single closet I went to netted me some XP. Every time I entered one of these closets, even if I didn't find anything else, boom, 100 XP. Or in the first part of the game, every time I'd find a vent, bam, another 100 XP. Every single time it seemed like. Still, it's helpful, but it just feels less rewarding. I didn't have to do much just to get some XP. The experience just wasn't the same. I also hate how there are a few characters from the original game that appear in this game, and the way they appear, it just kind of feels like fan service. The developers were like, there's a lot of these characters from the original game we could include in this game since it's a prequel, so which ones do we do? Really, it just feels lazy. Okay, I'm ready to wrap this up. That's my thoughts on the game in a nutshell. And I have a sneaking suspicion it's not going to change that way even by the time I finish the game. I still haven't played through Invisible War, or the sequel to Revolution, Mankind Divided. And since Mankind Divided is a direct sequel to Human Revolution, and probably looks and feels about the same, I really don't look forward to playing it, honestly. These latest two games are very well received, and I'm lost on why. Like, everything about Human Revolution, or just about everything, feels very inferior to the original. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna sound like an asshole here, and I promise I'm not being a contrarian, I swear. But most people who like Revolution or Divided, have they ever even played the original? Now I get that the original isn't the most accessible game, especially in this day and age. I mean, for starters, on Steam at least, you do have to install some fan-made patches in order to get it working properly on modern OSs. But there's still a reason why the game is a classic and, to this day, considered one of the best games ever made, not just on PC. I mean, I'm only playing through Human Revolution and eventually Mankind Divided just because they have the Deus Ex name attached to it. If neither of those games had that, I wouldn't have even looked their way. I wouldn't have even thought about touching them at all. Okay, but let's take away the Deus Ex part of it. I'm only making comparisons to the original because of the name association. But at least Revolution, a story-driven game, it still feels mediocre at best. And this is coming from someone who hasn't played that many RPGs and usually likes a good story to games. Not always, but usually. To me, personally, this game feels pretty forgettable. To anybody listening to my voice, I'd just recommend playing the original. I'd say it's way more worth your time and overall just a better experience. While Revolution isn't the only new game I'm playing at the moment, it is the one that's brought out the most emotion in me. I guess the other notable one is Serious Sam First Encounter, but I don't really have much to say on that one that hasn't already been said. It is fun, but very frustrating. That's all I got on that one. That's your review from me. Hey, future me here. Yeah, so I finished Human Revolution. Yeah, that just shows you how long it's taken me to get around to finishing this fucking video. As far as it goes towards my final thoughts, what I've already stated in the video hasn't really changed that much. I have a few other additions, but I'll just leave it at that. I did begin Mankind Divided, I mean, naturally. I'm not really gonna say much here, I'll reserve my thoughts for another time, but I will leave you off with this. The PC I currently have, I bought in 2020, and it was fairly beefy even for the time. And yet this game, one from 2016, makes my PC cry a little, which is kinda weird seeing as other games from 2016, such as Doom 2016 or Quantum Break, they don't make my PC cry. I don't know what it is. Anyway, back to it. That's it for this one. Stay tuned for, well, I really hope a video about a movie with my friend Vincent that I had mentioned in the last interlude. God, I really hope another shitty chain of events doesn't come along my way and mess up the progress of making these videos again.